back to work on the bench with an empty seat. A preview of what the justices will be focused on and the latest in the Brett Kavanaugh nomination battle. A Vatican first. 2 bishops from China will attend a global meeting of church leaders. We're in Rome for the opening this week. Deadly disaster. Pope Francis prays for Indonesia, dealing with the aftermath of a devastating earthquake and tsunami. And the blessing of pets. We'll take you to Peru, where early celebrations for the Feast of St. Francis are underway. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 1st, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Supreme Court kicks off a new term with only 8 justices. Republicans hoped nominee Brett Kavanaugh would have taken his seat on the court today. But the Senate's confirmation vote is on hold as the FBI investigates allegations of sexual assault. Correspondent Jason Calvi previews the term. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. 4 liberals and 4 conservatives now sit on the court. Chief Justice John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, and Stephen Breyer attended the Red Mass yesterday. Also there, retired Justice Anthony Kennedy. Judge Brett Kavanaugh hopes to fill his seat on the bench.
St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington hosted the 66th annual Red Mass. It gets its name from the vestments, symbolizing the Holy Spirit's power in the fiery tongues of Pentecost.
Could there not be a better time, both in our church and nation, to benefit from the healing power of the Holy Spirit? It is a power that treats the anger and divisions that so need the healing touch of our God.
The Mass is held to pray for legal professionals as the Supreme Court session opens. This year, Washington's Cardinal Donald Wuerl skipped. He's facing criticism for his handling of priest abuse cases.
And life is God's first gift to us.
The court so far has about 40 cases on its docket. Another possible case has to do with this cross on public land in Maryland. It honors the dead of World War I. But a court ruled it violates the Constitution.
It's outrageous, really, that courts are striking these down.
The Beckett Law Firm is defending a similar cross in Pensacola, Florida.
Our history and culture are full of religious significance. There were religious people who helped found our country, and we don't we forget them or censor them from history just because they're religious. And it's the same with these crosses. They're an authentic part of our culture and history. They don't coerce anyone to participate in religion against their will, and so they don't violate the Establishment Clause.
Beckett also represents this network. Now, other big cases the court could pick up: President Trump banning transgender troops and state-level defunding of Planned Parenthood, including in Louisiana and in Kansas. Now, tomorrow the justices hear the appeal of death row inmate Vernon Madison. His lawyers argue he should not be put to death for a murder he cannot remember due to dementia. Lauren?
You've covered several Supreme Court abortion cases. Will the justices hear new ones this term?
There's nothing on the docket yet. Today, the justices decided not to hear the case of a pro-life Tennessee constitutional amendment that says nothing in that state constitution protects a right to abortion.
Correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you, Jason. Joining me now is Amy Howe, co-founder of SCOTUSblog. Amy, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
Let's talk about this death penalty case before the court. Arguments will be heard tomorrow, starting tomorrow. We know that retired Justice Anthony Kennedy was a vote for the inmates in staying both executions. Could we see one of our first 4-4 splits here, do you think?
It's possible. I think, though, the justices are really intent at this point. We don't know when there's going to be a 9th justice, but I think that they really are probably going to be pretty focused on trying to come up with some kind of ruling, even if it's a relatively narrow one that might not make a lot of new law, because they really don't want to give the impression that they're unable to function with only 8 justices.
Well, we're waiting to see if the justices take up the Bladensburg Cross case in suburban Maryland, as Jason was mentioning. If they do, what needs to be made, what case needs to be made in order to keep the cross on public property?
I think that one case that the supporters of the cross are likely to make is that perhaps many people can agree that we shouldn't be putting up new crosses, but that this is a cross, really that this is pretty much squarely in line with a decision by Justice Stephen Breyer back in 2005 involving the Ten Commandments monument on the grounds of the Texas State Capitol, that this may be a cross, but it's part of a bigger, not only religious, but also historical and secular context, and that it's been here for over 80 years, I think, and no one's objected to it, which was something that Justice Breyer had suggested could be important in deciding whether there was a violation of the Constitution.
Just as an aside, I think many people in our audience would think that crosses should still be able to be erected.
Absolutely.
Let's just add that caveat here. Anyway, moving on. The American Bar Association 1 month ago said that Judge Brett Kavanaugh, nominee for the Supreme Court, was, quote, well qualified. Last week, the president of the ABA said, let's postpone the vote until the FBI investigation out of respect for due process. What impact is this confirmation process having on the court as it exists today, the opening day?
It was a really interesting day at the Supreme Court because there were only 8 justices. There was an empty space where the newest justice's chair would be. But other than that, it was really business as usual at the Supreme Court. The Chief Justice came out, said a few words about the start of the new term, and they went straight into oral arguments. They only had 8 justices for several months after the death of Justice Antonin Scalia, so they're kind of used to operating this way. And there wasn't really even an acknowledgement that Justice Anthony Kennedy was no longer there. He'd announced his retirement after the Supreme Court had its last public session in June, and it really was business as usual.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the report on the Supreme Court. Amy Howe, co-founder of SCOTUSblog.
Great to see you, Lauren.
President Trump says he supports a comprehensive FBI investigation looking into accusations against Judge Brett Kavanaugh, but he hopes the probe wraps up quickly and he's not thinking about a backup plan. The president says he is standing by his nominee. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump says he is keeping an open mind and will pay attention to the findings of this latest investigation. He says he doesn't mind if Judge Kavanaugh is interviewed by the FBI, but he's making it clear he wants his Supreme Court nominee confirmed.
I want them to do a very comprehensive investigation, whatever that means according to the senators and the Republicans and the Republican majority. I want them to do that.
The president says a comprehensive FBI probe will be good for Judge Kavanaugh to help remove any doubts.
Now, with that being said, I'd like it to go quickly. And the reason I'd like it to go quickly, very simple. It's so simple. Because it's unfair to him at this point.
The president says the process has been damaging to Kavanaugh's family. He pushed back on reports that the White House is trying to limit the extent of the investigation, saying the FBI should be allowed to interview Kavanaugh's accusers.
It wouldn't bother me at all. Now, it depends. I don't know all 3 of the accusers. Certainly, I imagine they're going to interview 2. The third one I don't know much about, but it wouldn't bother me at all.
The people following this continuing investigation the closest, perhaps those undecided senators. Republican Senator Susan Collins from Maine says she has confidence in the probe, but she is among a handful of senators who have not announced their position on Kavanaugh. Republicans cannot afford to lose more than 1 vote on the confirmation in the closely divided Senate. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. President Trump moves 1 step closer to fulfilling a major campaign promise, signing a revised North American trade deal with Canada and Mexico.
It means, more than anything else, far more American jobs, and these are high-quality jobs.
President Trump calls it the most important and biggest trade deal in U.S. history. He praised the leaders of Mexico and Canada and says the new agreement will benefit all 3 countries. The president still needs Congress to approve the deal, and he admits it might be difficult to convince Democrats. A priest in New York leaves official duties after being accused of sexual abuse and unwanted physical contact. Claims against Monsignor William Breslowski date back to the 1980s. A 2002 complaint against Breslowski was given to law enforcement in June. The Diocese of Rockville Center is investigating the allegations. Iran's military launches ballistic missiles into Syria. The country says the move is a response to an attack on a military parade, but they're also using it to send a message to the United States. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us with the details. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Iran's foreign minister says the attack is aimed at terrorists, and he says it's just the beginning. The United States says it's an excuse. Iran is trying to show its power. Iran's Revolutionary Guard sends 6 ballistic missiles early this morning toward eastern Syria. Officially, it's retaliation for an attack in September that killed 24 and wounded dozens during a military parade. But the message on one of the missiles bears this phrase: death to America, death to Israel, death to Saudi Arabia. An Iranian state TV reporter saying the world of arrogance, especially America, the Zionist regime, and Saudi Arabia, will hear the sounds of Iran's repeated blows. Tensions with Iran are high, with President Trump calling out the regime at the United Nations last week.
I ask all members of the Security Council to work with the United States to ensure the Iranian regime changes its behavior and never acquires a nuclear bomb.
In May, the president withdrew from the Obama-era nuclear agreement with Iran. Since then, the U.S. has imposed economic sanctions. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states view Shiite Iran as hostile.
And we started connecting the dots.
High-ranking officials from Bahrain and Yemen saying Iran is interfering with their country's affairs. The two diplomats spoke to Norman Rule, formerly with the CIA, at a United Against Nuclear Iran summit last week.
Their allies in Yemen, the Houthis and Lebanese Hezbollah, and some Iraqi Shia are adopting the same statements, which tells you, as they spread their ideology, that you have threats to the lives of people throughout the region.
Now, some of the most vulnerable in the region include religious minorities like Christians. Experts say Iran is trying to use their militants to control parts of Iraq, like the Nineveh Plain, a historically Christian area that was devastated by ISIS. Iran wants people living there to be loyal to its regime and its ideology, not Christianity. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting. Thank you, Wyatt. Burials begin in Indonesia after more than 800 people were killed in Friday's tsunami and earthquake. At least 50,000 are homeless. The UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction says up to 1.6 million people could be affected. The Washington Post reports an early warning tsunami system had been stalled in the testing phase. The area is desperate for food and medical supplies. Catholic Relief Services has sent teams with tarps, blankets, sleeping mats, and sanitation and cleanup kits.
La mia vicinanza alle popolazioni dell'isola di Sulawesi in Indonesia.
Pope Francis offered a prayer Sunday for the people in Indonesia. He expressed his solidarity and said he's praying for all those who have died, lost homes, and their livelihood. 2 Chinese bishops will be coming to the Vatican for a global meeting of bishops that opens this week.
Per 2 vescovi della Cina continentale.
Cardinal Lorenzo Baldisseri is the Secretary General of the Synod of Bishops. He made the announcement today at a Vatican press conference. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, this is the first tangible sign of the breakthrough deal between the Vatican and Beijing over bishop nominations. Tell us what you know.
Lauren, Chinese bishops have been invited in the past, but they've never been able to attend because Beijing wouldn't grant travel visas to bishops who are faithful to the Pope. Now, since the deal last month, the communist government has changed tack, and it'll be the first time bishops from mainland China take part in a synod. Now, the 2 bishops are Guo Jingkai of Chengde and Yang Xiaoting, and details of the China-Vatican agreement haven't been made public, as we know. So we're not sure what it entails, but we do know the Pope will have the ultimate say in bishops' nominations going forward. And Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin calls the agreement a pastoral rather than a political deal, Lauren, and the Vatican says the goal is to create greater freedom, autonomy, and organization.
Juliet, the clergy sex abuse crisis came up at this press conference. What did Vatican officials have to say?
Cardinal Baldisseri, who's in charge of the synod, says the crisis won't be an impediment at the synod. Rather, it's an opportunity for the church to learn. Baldirseri says young people are intelligent, they understand that it's human to be fragile, and the theme of this synod is youth, faith, and discernment. Now, there'll be 36 young people participating in the global meeting, along with more than 260 cardinals and bishops. As one journalist pointed out today, Lauren, that's an average of 7 young people per continent.
Juliet, Archbishop Charles Chaput of Philadelphia is challenging the working document that will guide the Synod, but other leaders like Chicago's Cardinal Blaise Cupich are defending it. Is this type of public debate causing concern at the Vatican?
Lauren, since the Synod is essentially a discussion among bishops, it's natural that not everyone sees the issues eye to eye, and that's precisely the point of a synod, for the bishops to present and discuss their points of view. So, for instance, during the Synod on the Family in 2014 and 15, there was a heated debate about the midterm report and about the final document, Lauren. This time around, Archbishop Chaput says the working document focuses too much on the social sciences and less on faith and conversion. Chaput cites the concerns of some theologians who say the document offers a false understanding of the conscience and its role in the moral life. Now, of course, the sex abuse scandal will be surely at the forefront for many journalists as the Synod takes place, and we can expect reporters to keep asking bishops about the various crises that are facing the Church around the world.
Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent, thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
We have a lot more coming up on News Nightly tonight. Details on Melania Trump's first solo international trip as First Lady, and analysis from a religious freedom expert on the Vatican's deal with China. Welcome back to the program. Melania Trump starts her first solo international trip as First Lady. She's expected to visit schools and hospitals in Ghana, Malawi, Kenya, and Egypt. One goal of the trip is to help replicate working U.S. programs. As we mentioned earlier in our program, 2 bishops from China will attend a 3-week synod at the Vatican. This is the first time Chinese bishops are being allowed to attend a meeting following an agreement last month with the Vatican to appoint bishops. Joining me now from the Religious Freedom Institute is its president, Dr. Tom Farr. Tom, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Lauren. Glad to be with you.
In your testimony last month on Capitol Hill, you expressed your concern that the Vatican's provisional agreement will not improve the lives of Catholics in China. As a Catholic and an expert on the subject of religious freedom, what makes you so skeptical?
Well, for one thing, I will say I'm delighted that Chinese bishops have been invited to the Synod. I think that's an important move. I would love to know which of the official bishops is coming. That kind of leads to my concern, Lauren. People should understand there are not 2 divided churches in China so that on one side of the street you have the official and the other the underground church. It's mixed, and they're good and holy priests and bishops in the so-called official church. But there are also apparatchiks. And as I understand the way that the provisional agreement has been structured, and this is based on press reports because I haven't seen it, it is that the process will be 3 or so bishop candidates will be chosen by the Chinese government, sent to the diocese when there's a vacancy. The faithful and the priests of the diocese will vote on one of those candidates, send it back to Beijing. They will present it to the Pope, and he has veto power. Well, that's, I suppose, a positive at the very end of that process, but it's hard to believe that a candidate sent by the Chinese government to the Vatican is going to contain a bishop that is truly a bishop of the Roman Catholic Church. And so this is my concern. I fear that the diplomats around the Pope have ill-served him on this agreement. It's very important that the Catholic Church in China be able to stand for what the Church stands for around the world, and that is human rights and human dignity and religious freedom.
Both the Vatican and the United States are pursuing diplomatic initiatives with China. How would you compare the 2 approaches?
Well, the United States approach, of course, is to attempt to advance religious freedom for everyone. And the Catholic Church, I think, and the Vatican should have, as a matter of theology and doctrine, the same goal in mind. But I think the charism of the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church is not that of a government, of a world power that is attempting to develop a diplomatic relationship with another world power. The charism of the Catholic Church and the Holy Father, with great respect, is to stand for the religious freedom of Catholics, stand for the witness of Catholics and the Catholic Church in every country of the world. I'm concerned that what the Vatican is doing here is similar to what a mistake, in my view, it made during the Cold War, prior to the papacy of John Paul the Great. There was a notion of realpolitik, so-called, in which the Vatican tried to negotiate deals with the Warsaw Pact. It didn't work well. The church in Hungary suffered, the church in Czechoslovakia suffered, simply because communism is intrinsically opposed to the basic views of the Catholic Church. So the difference, to answer your question, is that the United States is a world power along with China. The Vatican should not see itself as a secular power doing diplomatic agreements, but as a perhaps the only moral authority, or certainly the greatest moral authority in the world, that is capable of speaking truth to power, not just on behalf of Catholics, but everybody in China.
But you testified that the current assault on religion under President Xi is the most comprehensive since the Cultural Revolution. Will the U.S. be able to convince China that religious freedom within its borders is in China's best interest?
Well, there's a good question. The answer is, first, we haven't really tried to do that. But I think there are self-interest arguments that can be made. Religious groups, Catholics, Tibetan Buddhists, Muslims, Protestants, others, will do good works if you just leave them alone and stop the crackdowns that are going on, which have been going on for decades in Tibet, and in recent months have been horrific in Xinjiang province against Muslims there. If you can find your way, this is not exactly religious freedom, but it would be a major step forward, simply to leave these groups alone. They'll be economically productive. That's something the Chinese desperately want and need. They will take care of the poor and the elderly and the sick and the suffering and dying, something else that they cannot do with their own government. So the United States, in my view, needs to be making arguments to the Chinese government, not so much for religious freedom as we understand it, but just back off. Leave these people alone, and they will help you achieve your own domestic goals.
Dr. Tom Farr, president of the Religious Freedom Institute, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Up next on News Nightly, why Pope Francis is calling on the faithful to pray the Rosary every day this month, and a blessing ahead of this week's feast to the patron saint of animals. Governor Jerry Brown of California vetoes legislation requiring public universities to offer abortion medication at campus clinics. The bill was meant to vastly expand access to abortion drugs for college students. Brown says abortion services are widely available off campus, making the law unnecessary. And in Kentucky, a federal judge has struck down a law that put the state's last abortion clinic at risk of closing. It required abortion clinics to have written agreements with the hospital and ambulance services in case of medical emergencies. The judge says the law does not benefit women's health. And Pope Francis has invited Catholics around the country and the world to pray the Rosary every day during October, a month dedicated to Mary. The Holy Father says we should ask the Mother of God, as well as St. Michael the Archangel, to protect the Church from the devil. Finally, tonight, a church in Lima, Peru went to the dogs and other pets yesterday. A crowd gathered outside St. Francis of Assisi Church for the annual pet blessing. Among the participants this year, a rooster. Thursday is the feast day of St. Francis, the patron saint of animals. I love watching these dogs as they're being blessed turn their heads the other way. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.